Last week, we told you all about the horrific death of Carmen Henderson, allegedly at the hands of his wife, Evelyn Zigerelli Henderson. Investigators believe that Evelyn, his wife of over 30 years, intentionally ignited the back of the camping chair he was sitting in while he smoked a cigar on the patio. By the time he realized what was happening, the highly flammable material had melted and bonded to his clothes while still flaming and burning him as he struggled to get up from the chair and strip off his clothes. However, because he was mobility impaired, he wasn't able to move fast enough and he succumbed to the severe burns to his body resulting from his wife's actions. But the defense thinks they have another explanation for the evidence that makes Carmen's death an accident and not homicide. They present their own fire expert, and we'll go through his testimony today as we conclude the case of Evelyn Zigerelli Henderson on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And I'm Sergeant Pinback. Not the real one. I just sort of ended up here. Have you seen a beach ball?
No, what are you talking about?
Let's just move on.
What's the Pinback?
Yeah.
Is it from a movie?
Yeah.
What movie?
Dark Star.
Dark Star?
Hmm.
I haven't even heard of this movie.
Really? It's like a 1974 classic. I think that's the precursor to Alien. I think they stole that idea and made Alien.
Okay. So everybody, we have some really big news. But first, a quick reminder, it is super helpful if you follow us on social media, on Instagram, X, Facebook, and TikTok, at least for a few more days. If you see content from us, give us a little thumbs up or a like, and be sure to leave us a comment. You don't even have to come up with a comment that's relevant to the post. You can just say, I love your videos, or I can't wait for your next episode, or, I don't know, tell me your pet's name.
Beans.
The algorithm doesn't know if you're making relevant comments. It just gives us credit for comments. It makes it think that we're interesting people, and it pushes us out to new people so we can find our audience. Growing a podcast is hard, and we appreciate everything you can do to help us grow. In addition, we have a YouTube channel, and those subscriptions, likes, and comments also help push that content out, and we are grateful for each and every one of you that takes the time to help us. Finally, and most importantly, you can leave us 5-star ratings and written reviews on every podcast platform you listen to. And now you can leave individual comments on episodes on Spotify also. And now you have the opportunity to be a Crime to Burn walking billboard. We have merch. I will be linking it on all of our social media sites if I haven't already done it by the time this episode drops, and our website. So go get you some merch. We have several different designs, or you can just get one that only has our logo on it. That's fine. I've cut out almost all of our profit on any sales because we're not trying to make money on you. We just want you to advertise for us on your body. Hopefully you can find something you like at a price you can afford, but I'm working on additional designs, and if you have any suggestions, don't hesitate to email me at crimetoburn@gmail.com, which is also where you can give us constructive feedback, or you can tell us your fire stories, or you can tell me that your middle schooler learned what a pick was because you were listening to us in the car. Hi, Grant. Fair warning, we never claimed to be kid appropriate. I did laugh at the email I got, and I sent y'all out some stickers. However, any uncomfortable conversations that you have to have with your kid resulting from our content is on you. Feel free to pre-screen the episodes before we accidentally teach your kids about and ball games.
Hey, Grant, did you know that you could seriously think?
And now how about a quick recap of last week, because I suspect you probably don't remember all the details.
This is the second episode?
Uh-huh.
Oh, cool.
Evelyn Henderson and her husband Carmen were at their home in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and had been reportedly arguing over money when Carmen, a retired sheriff's deputy, went outside to smoke a cigar. Investigators believe this would have been relatively early in the evening, although the timeline is in question. They assert that Evelyn, a woman that was not taking her prescribed medication for mental health issues and was exhibiting signs of a mental health decline, then went outside and lit the back of a camping chair in which Carmen had been sitting on fire. The material of the chair was very flammable, but it also melted, and this melted material would drip onto other materials and stick to them while it was still flaming. So they believe this is what happened to Carmen. This burning material landed on his back and the back of his belt and ignited his clothes. Because he had mobility issues, he had trouble getting up from the chair, and by the time he was able to fumble out of his clothes, he had been subjected to extremely severe and fatal thermal injuries over most of his body, with the worst of the burns to his back.
And that's why you don't fall asleep at parties.
Evelyn then reportedly went back inside the house and waited possibly up to 12 hours before she called 911. She initially reported that her husband had either self-immolated in a successful suicide attempt or he had accidentally burned himself by dropping a cigar onto his clothes, or perhaps by lighting one of the packets of his cigars on fire, which apparently he liked to do, and accidentally spread it to his clothes. However, the fact that the most severe burns were on Carmen's back doesn't align with the theory that he accidentally or even intentionally set himself on fire. In either of those situations, we would expect the fire to begin on his front. Plus, he didn't have carbon monoxide in his bloodstream, so the fire didn't smolder a long time like a cigarette or cigar fire would be likely to do. Otherwise, we would expect to see him have a carboxyhemoglobin level higher than 0, which is what the medical examiner measured Carmen's levels to be. So they tested a strip of the chair material, and that's how they learned that it would behave similar to napalm and melt and stick to things while still flaming, and that the resulting fire would spread really vigorously. And the prosecution's fire investigators did a great job in the trial of showing how their theory of the fire could explain all the things they found on the back porch, including the fact that the back of Carmen's belt was completely burned through, but the front was not. The seat and footrests of the camping chair were not burned, but the back was completely burned away, which can be explained by him sitting there with his body shielding those unburned areas. There was a char mark on the wall behind where the chair had been, and some of the fabric from the chair had melted into it, supporting that the back of the chair had been on fire. And the material that melted down onto the cover of the window well would explain the hole they found in the plastic covering over the window well, because the material from the chair dripped down onto the window well. Did I explain that well enough?
I get it.
Well enough.
Wow.
To me, once the fire investigators presented their interpretation of the case and how they conducted their investigation, I felt that the evidence supported their theory really well. But that doesn't mean I think they did everything right. We know that Evelyn Henderson was being treated for some mental health issues and told the police that she wasn't on her medication. We know that they noted the nature of the house and even of Evelyn herself, and that those conditions were not consistent with a woman that was mentally well. And they questioned whether or not she was with it or lucid on the scene based on the way she spoke, but despite all these potential red flags, they still took her to the station and left her in an interrogation room for 7 straight hours. During the interrogation, she declined food and drink, and she changed her story multiple times. She told police that she'd gone to bed and just found her husband like that in the morning. She told them she'd gone to bed but heard him cry out in the middle of the night but not gone to check on him. She told them that she had actually been there and seen him physically on fire but didn't help him nor call 911 until the next morning.
Yeah, I wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. Applies here.
So police tried really hard to influence her to tell the truth by offering to work with the district attorney to get her leniency if she told the truth. And during that interrogation, they also played bad cop and called her names like evil and selfish and told her nobody loved her, which is a questionable approach when you consider that she was already exhibiting some symptoms of a mental health crisis. However, even if Evelyn was in a mental health crisis at the time of her interrogation and subsequent arrest, at the end of the first interrogation, she did ask if she would be given a public defender. She didn't specifically ask for one to be present with her for additional questioning, though, because she probably assumed that the questioning was now over. However, an investigator went to visit her in jail in the days following her arrest to discuss what the medical examiner had found. They hoped that presenting her with more evidence that supported a theory that she had murdered her husband would convince her to finally tell the whole truth. And when they arrived at the jail, they weren't able to record that conversation because apparently the jail has a policy prohibiting it. Now, I understand that for conversations with an attorney, because attorney-client privilege. But for what amounts to an interrogation at the jail, those should absolutely be recorded, in my opinion.
Well, it helps them sell drugs on the sly.
Ooh, so accusey.
I didn't accuse, I was just positing that might be an opportunity.
So 2 officers were in the room with her, and once again, she asked them if she was going to be given a public defender, But she didn't specifically ask to have her lawyer with her in the room. She only told them that she didn't have one yet. And then she did sign the Miranda waiver again, where she had to acknowledge that she was voluntarily talking to police without her attorney. Now, in this meeting, this is where police tell Evelyn that they have learned that the fire started at Carmen's back and that he died of thermal injuries and not smoke inhalation or anything like that. They explain how this is contradictory to her story that he did this to himself, and they try again to persuade her to tell them the whole story. And she continues to deny killing her husband. But then she says, "But I can't go through a jury trial," which the investigator jumps on like a Rottweiler on a pork chop. He tells her that he can help her get a plea deal and forego a jury trial if she's honest with him. And so she sits back and thinks about it, and then she says, "Okay, I did it." And he asks her specifically, "What did you do?" And she says, "I set him on fire." In their continued discussion, she tells the investigator that she went up behind him and set the back of the chair on fire, and that the melting and burning material caught his clothes on fire, and that he got up from the chair and he's on fire, and she's just standing there watching him as he's yelling to her to help him. But she just stood there and watched him burn, and then she went inside and waited until the next morning to call 911. So he gives her a notepad and tells her to write out her confession. And she looks at him and asks what she's supposed to write. And he says, "Well, I can't tell you what to write. It has to be your own words." So she wrote one sentence. "I set the fire with a match." And she signed it. That's it. That was her whole confession. Now, I've never been interrogated, and I've certainly never confessed to a crime, but I kind of feel like this was really odd, because I feel like after everything she's been through, there should have or would have maybe been some sort of relief at finally admitting to it. And I find it odd that she confessed with one sentence and no details, even though she'd already allegedly given the police more detail verbally.
All right, I set the fire. You build a fire, you get some sticks. You know, you start with little sticks and then bigger sticks on top, right? And you set a fire, you light a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And she burned a dude's ass up. Like, that's not just setting a fire with a match, man. I set the fire with a match. No, that ain't what you did. You burned some dude's whole ass up with a match. It just sounds so disconnected.
It does. So much of the things that she says sound disconnected. You know, we already talked about her mental health potential issues. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or anything like that, but I don't understand why the police would not have, as soon as they were questioning whether or not she was lucid and they found out that she's supposed to be on medication she wasn't taking, I don't understand why they didn't handle this differently.
You know, they got lots of different motivations. They want to get done, they want to go home, they want to finish the report, or whatever. You know, whenever you have, you know, so-called mentally ill people, it's just pretty easy to write them off and go home. And dude, mentally ill people they're hard to deal with. I get that. I don't know. I just think there's a way we could do better.
There's definitely a way we could do better. Now, the defense argued that this wasn't proper for the investigators to question her at the jail without a lawyer, even though she once again signed the Miranda waiver. And they said that this is because she had now asked twice about whether or not she'd be getting a public defender, and they should have interpreted this as her asking for her attorney to be there. I think this is a stretch. Don't sign a Miranda waiver if you want an attorney there. Don't talk to the police without an attorney. That's my advice.
Seems obvious to us.
And of course, that's not all the defense took issue with. They really harped on the condition of the house and the officer's statements on the scene about Evelyn not being with it as being evidence that she was clearly in a mental health crisis, which would have affected her decision-making skills. And they tried to bolster this argument, saying that after 7 hours in an interrogation room where she's being insulted and called names, of course she confessed, but it was under duress. But she hadn't actually confessed in the interrogation room during that 7-hour questioning. She confessed at the jail days later. But even if the jury bought that Evelyn was in the midst of a mental health crisis, it doesn't undo the horror of what investigators said she did to her husband. So the defense knows that they're going to have to call some of that fire investigation data into doubt if they have any chance of getting a jury to decide their client isn't criminally responsible for what happened. They're going to need their own fire expert, and they're going to need one on a budget, because these public defenders do have limited budgets to work with to mount a defense. Enter a man whose name I'm not going to include, because I don't want to bash him as a person, but I have some strong opinions about his testimony. What I can tell you is that he works for the insurance industry to investigate fires. Now, at one point during cross-examination, the prosecutor asks him about his fees to be there, and I have to say, I know what companies that I have worked for charge for any kind of work on a legal case, and this guy was the biggest bargain I have ever heard, at less than half of the hourly rate of the cheapest I've ever seen somebody do legal work. But regardless of his financial compensation, he left a lot to be desired.
You're not going to say his name. Can we call him Cole McGee?
We can call him McGee. If I try to say Cole McGee over and over again, I'm going to stumble.
You don't have to say Cole. I'm saying Cole.
You can call him whatever you want.
Okay.
So he started...
Cole.
So he started in on the fire testing that the investigators did when they set that strip of the chair material on fire. Now remember how I said they weren't trying to recreate the scene. They were trying to understand if the material would quickly ignite and if it would spread so they could figure out if it fit their theory. But this guy comes on the witness stand and he explains that this testing is useless because they didn't do it in a burn chamber and they didn't account for the ambient conditions like the wind and temperature differences. And then he jumps on to accuse the investigators of confirmation bias, saying that they did this basically to develop evidence that supports their theory instead of looking at the evidence and developing a theory from the evidence.
Isn't that kind of a common theme with these kinds of problems?
Well, I had to laugh because we already heard that their initial theory of the fire was that it started at the victim's feet, but the evidence didn't support that, so they had changed their theory. Like, they've already exhibited that they're trying really hard to make sure that they're properly interpreting the evidence.
When do we just stop trying to cover our asses and just tell true things? Is that too much? That's probably too far.
And I would agree that if you're trying to recreate the fire scene with the chair in question, you would want to try to replicate the existing conditions to the maximum extent possible. But that isn't what they were trying to do. And I don't believe the differences in the conditions in this case make a big difference in what conclusions they were able to draw, which was just the material is flammable, it does melt and burn, and it spreads rapidly. Those were the only conclusions they got from the chair testing that they did. They weren't trying to recreate the entire fire scene, which I would agree, if they were trying to do that, they should have used a laboratory.
What would they use? Someone's basement?
A carport, basically. Then he accuses the investigators of negative corpus. We talked about negative corpus in the Juwan Deering wrongful conviction case. This is where investigators call the fire arson because they rule out other causes, and even though they don't necessarily find evidence that specifically points to arson. This is not what investigators did. They did have evidence that shows the fire started behind the victim, and they ruled out all the potential accidental scenarios, and they found ignition sources on the patio that all required human hands to ignite and start the fire. So this is not negative corpus. I don't know. I feel like he's just trying to throw out fancy words to make the jury think he's smart.
This is what happens when you spend 3 hours at Hooters with your friends trying to make a case.
Maybe that's what he was doing. But he tells the court that in his paid opinion, and I'm not crapping on him because he was paid, it doesn't bother me that somebody gets paid to do this kind of thing. It bothers me that he has such an insane interpretation of the evidence that makes no sense to me to earn a paycheck. That bothers me. But he said that in his interpretation, he thinks this is an accident. So he tells the court that the burn pattern on the wall couldn't have been made by the chair because of reasons that he doesn't ever do a good enough job of explaining for me to understand. Me, a fire expert, I could not understand his reasoning why he says that burn mark couldn't have been from the chair. And I read it like 19 times.
But he says reasons.
He didn't say reasons, but he explained like height and distance and all this stuff that just didn't make sense. And maybe if I'd had the photos that they were looking at in court, I could have made more sense of it. The investigators for the prosecution, their recounting of how the burn mark ended up on the wall, I could understand without photos. This guy couldn't figure out what he was trying to say. And his lack of ability to concisely explain his reasoning or suggest that the burn mark may have had another source that I could reliably say, oh, that makes sense. That really annoyed me. You can't just get on the stand and say you disagree with an interpretation of the evidence and then not give an alternate reasonable interpretation, in my mind. Then he explains that he doesn't think that the victim was even sitting in the camping chair when he caught fire. Now, he explains that there is a different style of chair at the patio table, and that it makes more sense that a man like Carmen Henderson, who had a tough time getting around, would not have wanted to sit in a camping chair that can be hard to get out of when there's a normal chair complete with a seat cushion just a few feet away. And he goes on about how humans are creatures of habit, and the location of the fan and the cell phone on the table and the partially eaten pretzel on the table tell us that he was probably in his preferred place to sit.
Not getting a Smecker award.
And yes, it could have been his preferred seat, but how many times do you walk into a room and sit in a seat that isn't your preferred seat for whatever reason?
You think he put on headphones and did a little dance?
No.
I'll never not remember it that way.
But he says that Carmen had to have been sitting in the other chair, and so Carmen somehow catches his clothes on fire, and through some series of events that he doesn't adequately explain, he jumps out of the chair, he's taking off his clothes, and somehow manages to knock the other chair that he wasn't sitting in over, and the back of that chair catches fire, but the seat and armrests don't, even though no one's sitting in it to shield those areas. And the flame only consumed the back of the chair, and not the whole chair. So his theory here holds water like a colander, if you ask me. Instead, he says that Carmen dropped a cigar on himself in the chair that was at the patio table, sets himself alight. He stands up, he rips off his clothes, and falls over and manages to pull the camping chair down in the process. And this is how the back of the camping chair caught fire. His clothes were found roughly 3 feet from the camping chair. I'm not saying that it's completely impossible that wind or something couldn't have carried some sort of ember from Mr. Henderson's clothes over to the camping chair if he hadn't been sitting in it. But there should have been a lot more of the melted material on the ground in front of the chair since it eventually fell forward. But they found the melted material on the house and on the window well, and not where it fell forward. So this goes against his theory. And also, it's just really improbable for it to happen this way when we have a theory that is so much better supported by the evidence and more likely. So if we're comparing theories here, this is like saying, if you find hoof prints outside a farm, you're going to assume it was the horses and not the zebra from the zoo. Feels what this guy's doing. He's saying, well, there's hoof prints, but you can't prove that it wasn't a zebra. But we know, in all likelihood, it was a horse. Because that's what makes the most sense.
We're just running Occam's razor here.
This one is just way too far-fetched for me.
Like, how do you know it wasn't a gazelle?
I don't. You're right, I don't. But I'm not going to bring a gazelle to court to try to prove it.
People that know hoof prints, comment down below.
We're not done. He also goes back to the testing that investigators did, and he makes a huge to-do about the fact that they only tried to light the chair with a grill lighter and not with a match or cigarette lighter, which would be slightly smaller. And yes, it would be. But the flame temperatures between a match, a lighter, and a grill lighter are all not that different because the yellow-colored flames that you see, they're all roughly the same temperature. So even though it was a smaller flame, all that would prove is that perhaps it might have had to be exposed to the flame for just a touch longer. But I felt like this was a really underwhelming argument that they used a grill lighter instead of a cigarette lighter or a match.
Do you think these people go home and just like cringe in front of the mirror for like an hour after they spout this nonsense?
I hope they do, but I doubt it. And then he points out that holding a match for the length of time that it takes to ignite the fabric, and remember they timed it at about 5 seconds with the grill lighter, and he's saying they would have had to hold it for longer. He said it would likely burn your fingers before it successfully lit the material on fire. What I say is, I've been able to hold a match for more than 5 seconds without burning myself. I can't put any stock in this argument. He claims that it would take 15 or so seconds, in his opinion, for a match to light the chair on fire. And he's very critical of the testing, but he didn't do any testing himself or bring any videos to show how long you would have to hold a match to a chair to light it on fire. He just claims that he knows that it's going to be probably 15 seconds.
He can just make up stuff out of his imagination like that?
Apparently. This investigator claims that because fire burns upward, the charring to the lower legs and feet mean that the fire couldn't have started at his back.
Or he was standing on his head.
Y'all, we've got to stop with the fire only burns up argument. It is bunk. Fire radiates out heat in all directions, including downwards. That's how candles work. It radiates heat down to the wax that melts it and allows the wick to draw the wax up. Fire moves slower going down, but it can still go down.
Quit with your linear thought. Things move out in every direction.
And then he makes one point that I'm going to concede is a valid argument. He criticizes them for not doing tests with a dummy in the chair. Which, okay, this is a fair point, and I'm going to explain why. I did my...
And he was like, I was available the whole time.
I did my senior research project on the children's sleepwear flammability standard. I posted a reel a while ago about burning baby dolls in the bathtub. And the reason is because at one point all children's sleepwear had to be made of synthetic materials because fire would flash and ignite the whole garment, whereas synthetic materials would melt locally and cause a much smaller burn.
Cotton kills, baby.
So the cotton industry wanted part of that super lucrative children's pajama money. And they started lobbying to be allowed to provide cotton sleepwear that wasn't flame retardant treated. And what they did was they did their own testing, and they determined, and this is true, if you have skin-tight cotton clothes, so like think of like spandex type cotton.
No air gap.
No air layer between the skin and the clothes, the cotton sleepwear will behave the same as synthetic sleepwear. So the deal is, this investigator's saying that if Carmen was sitting in the chair and leaning back against the chair, that could have modified their results about how flammable the chair material was and how it behaved and how quickly it ignited. But the problem, and I'll concede that that's a good point, but the problem here is how many times have you sat in a camping chair and leaned forward on your knees, like with your elbows on your knees, and not necessarily had your back against the back of the chair? So even if they had done...
When have I what?
You sat on a camping chair like with your elbows on your knees, leaning forward like this?
Many times.
Right, that's what I'm saying, is that, so he's saying they should have done a dummy test with the dummy's back against the chair to simulate no air layer on one side. But I'm saying that that's still not going to answer the question because we don't know if he was leaning forward in the chair or sitting back in the chair at the time of the fire. So there still could have been an air gap on both sides if he was leaning forward.
I just really didn't know you could burn a whole person to death in a camping chair. I didn't think there would be enough fuel load to get the job done. Terrible injuries, yeah, but man, like a whole like human immolation from a friggin' camping chair? That's crazy, man.
It is crazy. I mean, that's part of what shocked me about this case was, like, how many times have we sat next to a campfire in a camping chair? Or next to a grill?
I've spent half my life next to a campfire
right.
in a camping chair.
I've never once worried, like if it was super windy, about my camping chair catching fire.
I've fallen asleep with all kinds of burning things near my face. Like, this never occurred to me.
It never occurred to me either. Then he goes on to say that cigarettes are supposed to be fire safe. And I know this sounds absurd, but it's actually true.
It's true within the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
They started adding a chemical or something, right?
Yeah, so he calls them speed bumps. And I recognize that this sounds silly, but this was legitimately an effort to make smoking safer.
Yeah.
But they add materials to cigarette that requires a little bit more energy to stay ignited and maintain the burning. I
actually remember when they did this. I used to smoke cigarettes. And so...
Yeah.
I remember when they did this, you could tell, like, it just go out.
Yeah, so when you draw on a cigarette, you're pulling, air in, just getting more oxygen, and you get that, the end of the cigarette sort of like flares up and lights up, right? So with this new quote-unquote speed bumps, as this guy calls it, It just means that when the flame burns down to one of those locations, if you don't draw on the cigarette while it's at that point, it will eventually go out. Where if you draw on the cigarette, it gives you enough extra energy that it can overcome that extra material and continue burning.
You don't happen to know what that speed bump was, do you?
I could probably tell you if I did a Google search real quick, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
Probably like put layers of gooch juice on there.
That's probably what it is. So this investigator talks about that cigarettes will go out and that the testing data that the fire investigator referenced, saying that it probably wasn't his cigar that started the fire, was on cigarettes. And he points out that cigars aren't made with those same quote-unquote speed bumps in them. And he's right, they're not, because cigars don't need it to self-extinguish. If you know anyone that smokes cigars, they're constantly having to relight the damn things. They're not more prone to staying lit than a cigarette is. They burn out by themselves too. And we have testing data to prove that cigars actually burn out by themselves more frequently than cigarettes do.
They do, but while they're alight, they have a bigger burning area.
They do, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's what I was about to say next as soon as I find it in my thing. My next paragraph, since you brought it up, I was going to say that I'm going to throw him one more bone. I did agree with another statement that he made. The fire investigators presented data from extensive testing by the ATF of cigarettes burning on bedding and furniture. And they found that in less than 2% of fires, modern cigarettes would progress to flaming fire. Less than 2% of the time. However, this testing didn't include cigars. While I do understand that cigars are more prone to self-extinguishment, if the heat released from a cigar before self-extinguishment is different than that of the heat released from a cigarette, it could drastically alter the results. In addition, in their testing, they used all bedding and furniture, which they stated they were comfortable comparing because the materials are similar to like cotton blends and stuff that clothing are made out of. But we know from the sleepwear testing that even cotton clothes is going to behave differently whether it's tight or loose. And so cotton sheets tightly against a bed could absolutely behave differently than clothing. So I'm going to give him the fact that I'm not putting a whole ton of weight on the ATF testing, but he fails to address how one would accidentally drop your cigarette or cigar onto your own back. He also didn't do adequate research because if he had, he would have found fire testing supporting that cigars burn out more easily than cigarettes when left alone. If you don't draw on a cigar and you just leave it sitting in the ashtray, it will likely go out. I know in my childhood, I've seen men abandon cigars in ashtrays multiple times and they would come back and have to relight them. My own experience of actually smoking a cigar at a Jimmy Buffett concert didn't go well. It also self-extinguished, but that may have been because it was a torrential downfall.
I'm pretty sure you need to make air quotes when you say cigar in that context.
No, I was smoking a cigar.
Cigar.
What?
See how I'm making air quotes when I do that? See how that changes the context?
I was smoking a cigar.
A cigar.
No, not a cigar.
See how I put two fingers up on each hand? And
my dad was there.
And then I move them up and down when I go, cigar.
My dad was there.
Right. Cigar.
And I remember it vividly because he looked at me and he goes, "Who gave you a cigar?" Okay. Now, like I said, the fire started on Carmen's back, and maybe a contortionist might be at risk of setting the back of his chair on fire while smoking, but a 68-year-old man with mobility issues? Nah, I'm not buying it. But this fire investigator hired by the defense was not a contortionist, at least not until the prosecution got a hold of him and tied him in knots on the stand. So the prosecution cross-examines him, and it turns out that they identified that he has some interesting affiliations. He is a member of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and like a gajillion other similarly named organizations that are all aimed at defense. This isn't illegal. This isn't a problem. But it does seem to imply that he might have some bias. And prosecutors have bias too, but he's coming in as an expert witness that is supposed to be impartial to convince a jury to look at the evidence through different eyes, and I feel like some of these affiliations that they identified eroded his credibility, making it a lot easier to believe that he would say anything on the stand for a paycheck. Then they further eroded his credibility by highlighting typos in his report that changed the meaning. Like, you can tell from the context that he was making the opposite point, but he forgot a word like not in the sentence that changed the whole meaning of the sentence.
Whoops.
So this isn't a direct example, but it would be like if I said, there's not a pile of ashes here, so we know there was a fire.
What?
If I said, there's not a pile of ashes here, so we know there's a fire.
That makes no sense.
Exactly. But I should have said, there's a pile of ashes here, so we know there's a fire. Or there's not a pile of ashes, so we know there's no fire. So they had to call him out on those typos to try to get him to clarify what he meant, because his report was so badly edited.
There's not a pile of not ashes, so this person couldn't have possibly not have experienced human spontaneous combustion.
Well, that was just a random example I pulled out of the thin air. That wasn't actually from the report, but yeah, like that. Proofreading isn't my strong suit either. If I've ever texted you, you know this. But if I'm presenting a report in court when somebody's freedom depends on my interpretations of evidence, you better believe I'm going to have a lot of really good editors look at it before I turn it in.
You're supposed to act like an expert.
And in his report, he said that he believed the fire started at the victim's feet or lower legs based on photos. So, of course, the prosecution asked him if he was more qualified than the medical examiner to determine the severity of burns to the victim. And no, he admitted he was not. So that right there, along with the typos and the fact that he's basically a professional expert for defense only, just really sealed the deal for me, making him seem like a witness willing to get up on the stand and say anything he was paid to say. I'm not saying that's what he was doing. That's just how it came across. And his interpretation of the evidence certainly isn't the most logical interpretation, but the most damning is that basically his interpretation of the evidence requires two separate fires to occur. One to burn Mr. Henderson, and another one to burn the chair that's 3 feet away. And that's as probable as hoof prints on a ranch being from a zebra from the zoo.
Well, matches come in books. It's not like you only had one.
I'm saying it's remotely possible, but in light of the other explanations for the evidence, it's a little absurd.
Look, Chewbacca was a Wookiee. That's all you need to know.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Defense Fire Expert Witness. I've not named you out of professional courtesy. I at first accused you of massively undercharging for your services, but after hearing your theory of the fire, I think maybe you need to give the defense a little more of a discount next time. But let's be reasonable here. The odds were always stacked against Evelyn Henderson. Justice is not blind. She was a woman that was suffering from mental health issues, and the evidence more reasonably and logically stacked up in a way that points a very confident accusatory finger directly at her. And I have to say that I do think the prosecution got this one right, even if I don't think that the cops got it right in terms of their conduct. I think the defense summed it up in closing arguments best by saying, "What is not fair game in an interrogation of Evelyn are these names. Quote, you're evil, 100% evil to steal money from a husband, and that's what you're doing. This just makes you a cold-blooded killer now. No one loves you. You have no money left. You have no family. No one loves you. Who do you got? Who do you have, Mrs. Henderson? Nobody." Unquote.
Your feet stink and you don't love Jesus.
So the defense is saying that the way that they treated a woman that was exhibiting signs of mental illness, that was not fair game, and I agree with them. I don't think it was. Nobody cares what I think, and that's fine, but I'm putting it out there because I can, because it's my podcast.
We hear you roar, woman.
And to my surprise, the defense never called in any psychologists or psychiatrists to testify on behalf of the defense about how statements like this could have affected Evelyn Henderson or anybody when they're being pressured to confess to a crime. So the jury only deliberated for 4 hours. They found Evelyn Zigerelli Henderson guilty of second-degree murder and aggravated arson. At sentencing, a daughter of Carmen Henderson from a previous marriage spoke about her dad, and she spoke directly to Evelyn. She said, quote, "He loved you so much. You just don't know how much he loved you. He loved you. He was loyal to you. He loved you. You just needed to know that my dad really, really loved you." End quote. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and Evelyn Zigerelli Henderson was sent to prison wearing the same handcuffs that she had worn for her entire trial. The handcuffs that had once belonged to the husband she murdered from his days as a sheriff's deputy.
They put the same handcuffs on her?
The police made sure that she wore the handcuffs that had been his, And they did not tell her, and they only told Carmen's daughters after the trial that they had specifically arranged this, and Evelyn never knew.
Hey, look, I'm all for poetic justice, but that's kind of sick.
It is. I agree. And that's the conclusion of the Evelyn Zigerelli Henderson case on Crime to Burn. This case just concluded in May of 2024. And I haven't found any information on pending appeals. I do have a news alert set, so I'll bring you any updates that I find out along the way. And I'd like to conclude by sharing what one of Carmen Henderson's employees at the limo service had to say about him. So these are the words of a man named Mr. Kevin Freeman. He said, quote, "This man was an incredible man, an incredible individual. I mean, he would give you literally the shirt off his back, the last nickel in his pocket." And he explained that he met Carmen collecting donations to put together bags of school supplies for needy kids. And Carmen not only gave him a donation, but then immediately gave him a job with his limo service. And that's this week's episode of Crime to Burn.
I was just exercising my eyeballs.
It's okay, we've had food today. We had Dolly Parton's waffles.
Mm-hmm. It's not bad manners, it's just good waffles. Did you fail handwriting class? There's no way you can mentally gymnastic yourself into making that an S.
We need a 12-step program for the cat and freaking plastic.
That's what you need to do.
What?
Start like a cat ASMR channel. Yeah, like tearing up furniture and playing with plastic bags.
Puking in your shoe. I cannot talk today. Blah, 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 blah.
You just kind of drink Mountain Dews and eat Pop-Tarts. If there was something about me you could light on fire, what would it be?
Not your beard. You have a glorious beard.
What about my dead fetus baby?
You don't have a dead fetus baby.
I do too. I have conjoined fetal dyslexia.
I don't know how to transition back to the case from that. Is this a piece of chainmail? How do I keep finding pieces of chainmail on the floor? As soon as this podcast takes off, I can buy you real high quality chainmail.
God, I can't wait. I'm gonna LARP so weird if I get rich. I'm just gonna go to Walmart with a battle axe. Like, it's not a crime.
She thinks she's gonna jump up here in my lap. Ow, ow!
She sounds insistent.
Yes, I love you too,
Jesus, does that hurt?
Yeah, I can turn just about anything into a song. She's got Pastorella. You were about to challenge me and then you decided it wasn't worth it.
Too mean.
What was it?
Rhyme orange.
All the small things don't rhyme with orange.
I'm just gonna sit over here while you regain your sanity.
That the resulting fire... Oops. God.
Are you having a stroke today?
Yep. And spread...
You said, napalm.
Napalm. You look really disgusted with me right now.
I don't know what we're talking about right now. Oh, man. My ass is telling me I've been sitting here for another 30 minutes. You'd be surprised how much you need your ass to walk with your legs.
You also need it to not fall in the toilet.
Better just you need superior upper body strength. and a whole lot of Lysol because you got to hold that bowl. Now all I can see is one of those Olympic people, like how they use the horse. And they like all spin around that. Now I just see someone on a toilet doing that. Oh, you broke me. Why am I still seeing it? That toilet bowl's on fire. Overrated behavior.
Gotta keep it overrated.
We do that. We're delivering that.
This is why we don't do video.
I'm partially paralyzed right now. Continue that alliteration while I get a beer.
He's partially paralyzed. What a persnickety predicament to perpetrate on my perfect partner. Winston, on the other hand, was very pleased.
He will eat a rock. The little girl child was feeding him snowballs earlier. And he was just happy to eat them, too. He was like, oh, that's a good, that's a great snowball.
Did it about 5 seconds with the grill lighter would cause your dog to have bad dreams.
You don't know they're bad.
Okay, I don't.
Meow. 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 Ow, dude, no.
I tripped and fell down the mudslide, but not like tripped, but like literally fell.
The mudslide?
Yeah, you see, it had been a drought all summer, and we had lawn tickets at Merriweather Post Pavilion.
Oh, I remember this venue.
It rained 3 solid days before the concert. The entire yard was just
like
mudslide.
Woodstock.
Mm-hmm. And I slipped. I fell down what party goers and concert goers were using as a mudslide.
And you found out that was really the bathroom.
And I found out that I wasn't going to be allowed back into the car to return home covered from head to toe in mud. And so I had to buy clothes off of somebody in the parking lot.
Did they go home naked?
Well, I bought his shorts and t-shirt, so he went home in his boxers, whoever he was. Thank you for your shorts and t-shirt, kind sir. I paid him $20 for them, and he seemed to think that was a good deal.
What a bargain.
That was the first and last Jimmy Buffett concert I attended.
Did you find my beach ball? Okay, but if you see an ambulatory beach ball, a bipedal beach ball, a beach ball with dexterity, you let me know. Or was he a jiu-jitsu guy? Or, the gentle art of folding clothes with people in them?
Right. How did this paragraph get before that one?
You got the beans before the Frank.
I do.
Hashtag jiu-jitsu.
I gotta just scrap this whole example.
This example is Can we name it Will Expert Witness for Chick-fil-A Sandwich?
I just have a different people tolerance than you do.
But they're not being real. They just say things like they're on a rail, like they're NPCs. Do they even have fries?
Mm-hmm. Waffle fries.
That's not a fry! That's like a group. That's like saying a man-o-war is a jellyfish. That's...
Waffle fries, the man-o-war of the fry. The fast food industry.
Dude, everything has extra sweat.
You've ruined my fast food addiction.
These people don't love you, man.
I love me some sausage. We're on Spread Shop.
And it is not like it sounds. They're totally wholesome designs. They're not.
They are.
They're not gaping. They're not.
I haven't seen one gaping.
But man, why would you name it that? Spread Shop? Maybe if you're Welch's Jelly.
Or KY.
Oh, no.
Maybe we can get them to sponsor us.
Call us Spread Shop. This is not redemptive at all. They're usually just willing to do anything because their child support didn't come in. Are you doing that with your mouth somehow? You got so much meat on your head. I love your head meat.
I'm a little afraid I'm going to fall down the hill. I don't know. I can't find a video of him howling though.
It sounds like this. I'm so upset. We'll go halvesies, but I'm a little bigger, so my half's gonna be a little bigger. I knew there was something missing in my life. He's making me lactate. Why are you confusing me, Mommy?
This is Evelyn Zigerelli Henderson.
Bruh. Look, just because she looks like Gandalf.
She has a beard.
She's got a Fu Manchu. She's got a chin dangler. She's got some face foliage. Well, I mean, I can understand, like, that's a lot to tweeze. It's definitely not gonna scar any children. Don't you think that's ironic? Got 3 people in ZZ Top. 2 of them have beards. One of them's named Beard.
That's a good place to end today.